The whisper. The fluorescent glow of a roadside diner illuminated the quiet night, its hum barely audible above the soft clinks of silverware and murmured conversations. A police sergeant, Aaron Blake, sat in his usual corner booth, his coffee untouched as he scribbled notes into a leather-bound journal. The late hour and the diner's peaceful atmosphere provided him the solitude he cherished after long shifts. But tonight, something felt different. An unfamiliar tension hung in the air. The bell above the entrance chimed, drawing Aaron's attention. A man and a young girl entered, bringing a gust of cool night air with them. Aaron's sharp eyes, trained by years of police work, immediately zeroed in on the pair. The man's broad smile seemed forced, his movements too deliberate as he guided the girl to a booth near the window. The girl, no older than 9, walked stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't meet anyone's gaze. "Come on, sweetie," the man said, his voice unnaturally cheerful. "Let's get you those chocolate chip pancakes I promised." Aaron sipped his coffee, keeping his focus on them without appearing intrusive. The girl's body language was screaming something he couldn't ignore. Hunched shoulders, trembling fingers, and darting eyes. She sat with her back pressed firmly against the booth, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. The waitress approached, her notepad ready. "What can I get you folks?" The man grinned. "Chocolate chip pancakes for my little princess here," he said, reaching out to ruffle the girl's hair. She flinched, a subtle movement, but one Aaron caught instantly. "And just coffee for me." Black. Aaron kept his expression neutral, though his instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. He observed the girl as the waitress asked if she wanted whipped cream on her pancakes. The girl didn't answer, instead glancing at the man as though seeking permission. The man filled the silence with overly loud chatter about their supposed road trip, but his words sounded rehearsed, lacking genuine warmth. "I need to use the restroom," the man announced, standing abruptly. He patted the girl's shoulder. "Be good, princess." The girl nodded silently as he walked toward the back of the diner. The moment he disappeared, her demeanor shifted. She looked around frantically before her gaze locked on Aaron's uniform. With quick, hesitant steps, she slid out of the booth and approached his table. Aaron leaned slightly forward, his calm presence inviting her to speak. "This man isn't my dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her wide, terrified eyes bore into his. "Please help me." Aaron's heart pounded, but his face betrayed none of the urgency he felt. "Stay calm," he said softly. "Go back to your seat. I'll handle this." The girl nodded, her small frame trembling, and returned to her booth just as the man reappeared. Aaron watched the man's return carefully. His smile, though still wide, carried a sharper edge now as his gaze flicked briefly to Aaron, his expression hardening. "Everything okay, princess?" the man asked, his voice cerebrally sweet as he sat down. "Yes," the girl replied, her voice mechanical. She stared at her plate, which the waitress had just placed in front of her. Aaron sipped his coffee, his mind racing. He had no way of knowing who this man was or what his intentions were, but one thing was certain: the girl was in danger. "Nice night out," Aaron remarked casually, his voice carrying just enough to reach their table. "Best time for a road trip." The man glanced at him, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Yeah," he replied. "We're just passing through. My daughter loves pancakes." Aaron smiled slightly. "They're the best around. My own daughter loves them too." The girl's eyes darted to him, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Aaron's demeanor remained relaxed, but his hand subtly moved toward the radio on his belt. Pressing the button without drawing attention, he spoke into it quietly. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Blake. Possible abduction situation at Eddie's Diner, Road 7. Request immediate backup. Code 207A. The radio crackled with a confirmation. The man leaned back in his seat, his gaze flicking to Aaron again, this time more guarded. "So, you're a cop?" he asked, his tone light but with an undercurrent of tension. Aaron smiled. Just a local officer grabbing a late coffee. Long shifts. You know how it is. The man nodded, his fingers drumming on the table. His movements were increasingly restless. Aaron noticed his right hand dip beneath the table, and his posture subtly shifted as if preparing to stand. The tension in the diner was palpable now, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Aaron knew he needed to act, but he couldn't risk the man bolting or harming the girl. The sound of sirens broke through the quiet night, growing louder as they approached. Red and blue lights reflected off the diner's windows. The man froze, his gaze darting to the exit and back to Aaron. "Looks like your coffee break's over, officer," the man said, his tone darkening. Aaron stood slowly, his hands visible to avoid escalating the situation. "Stay where you are," he said evenly. "Let's talk." The man bolted. Aaron moved fast, intercepting him near the door. They collided, crashing into a table and sending plates and silverware clattering to the floor. The girl screamed, pressing herself into the corner of the booth as chaos erupted around them. Backup officers swarmed the diner, their shouts echoing as they helped subdue the man. Handcuffs clicked into place as he was dragged outside, his curses ringing in the air. Aaron knelt by the girl, his voice gentle as he reassured her. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I promise." Tears streamed down her face as she clung to his hand, her small fingers gripping his with desperate strength. As the sirens faded and calm returned to the diner, Aaron knew this was just the beginning. Whoever this man was, he wasn't acting alone. And the girl's whispered words, "This man isn't my dad," were only the first piece of a much larger puzzle, unraveling the mystery. The station buzzed with quiet intensity. Officers shuffled through reports, phones rang intermittently, and a steady hum of conversation filled the air. In the middle of it all, Sergeant Aaron Blake sat in the interview room across from the girl he had rescued. Her small frame was dwarfed by the oversized chair, and the bright fluorescent lighting made her pale, tear-streaked face seem even smaller. She clutched a cup of hot chocolate, her fingers wrapped tightly around the warm ceramic. Aaron had asked the department's social worker to step outside for a moment, hoping a one-on-one conversation might help her open up. "My name's Aaron," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "What's yours?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if afraid someone might come through at any moment. "Lila," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name," Aaron said with a gentle smile. "Lila, you were really brave tonight. I need to know a little more so I can make sure you're safe. Can you tell me about the man you were with?" Lila's grip on the cup tightened, and her lips quivered. "He's not my dad," she said again, her voice barely audible. He said if I told anyone he'd find me." Aaron leaned forward, his tone steady and reassuring. "You're safe here. He can't hurt you anymore. I promise." Lila looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing the sincerity in his words. Finally, she nodded, the tiniest flicker of trust breaking through her fear. "I was at the park," she began, her voice trembling. "The one with the blue slide. He said his dog was lost, and he needed help finding it." Aaron felt a surge of anger, but kept his face calm for her sake. He'd heard this tactic before. Predators luring children with promises of puppies or candy. It was horrifying how effective such lies could be. "I told him I couldn't leave the park," Lila continued, "but he said it was just behind the trees, really close. When I got near the trees, he grabbed me." Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes. "He put his hand over my mouth, and I couldn't scream." Aaron's jaw clenched, but he maintained his steady demeanor. "What happened next?" he asked gently. "He put me in a car. It smelled funny, like old food and gas," she said, wrinkling her nose at the memory. "He said he'd take me home if I didn't fight." "Do you remember anything about the car? The color? The inside?" "It was black," she said after a moment, "and messy. There were wrappers everywhere." Aaron nodded, mentally filing away the details. "You're doing great, Lila. Do you know how long you were in the car?" She shook her head. "It felt like forever. Then he took me to a house. It was dark inside, and there were no windows, just a little one up high. I could hear cars outside sometimes, but I couldn't see them." "Did you see anyone else?" Aaron asked, leaning forward slightly. "No," she said, shaking her head again. "But he was always on his phone. He kept saying things like, 'next drop-off,' and 'stay on schedule.' I think he was talking to someone." Aaron's heart sank. This wasn't just an isolated abduction. It sounded like part of a larger operation. Human trafficking was a dark and intricate web, and Lila had likely just stumbled into one of its threads. Did he ever say a name? Either his or the person he was talking to. She furrowed her brow, thinking hard. He called someone Vic once. He said, "Vic, don't mess this up." Aaron jotted down the name in his notebook. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "You're being so brave, Lila," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You're helping me more than you know." The door opened, and the department's social worker stepped inside. "We've arranged for Lila to stay with a foster family for the night," she said softly. Lila's eyes widened in panic. "No, I don't want to go. What if he finds me?" Aaron crouched down to her eye level. "Lila, I promise you, he won't find you. We'll have officers keeping watch all night. Your job now is to get some rest and stay safe. Can you do that for me?" After a long pause, she nodded reluctantly. Aaron stood, watching as the social worker led her out. He knew Lila's ordeal was far from over, but she was alive and safe for now. That was more than many victims of trafficking could say. Back at his desk, Aaron dove into the details. He cross-referenced missing child reports with known trafficking rings in the area. The name Vic was a slim lead, but with Lila's description of the vehicle and the man, it was something to work with. Blake called Detective Linda Carson, a colleague and close friend. "We got something." Aaron looked up as Linda approached, holding a tablet. Traffic cameras caught a black sedan near Maple Street, where Lila said she was taken. It matches her description, and the plate belongs to a Victor Kane. He's got priors for drug trafficking and assault. Aaron's gut tightened. Where is he now? "We tracked the vehicle to an address on the outskirts of town," Linda said. "It's an old warehouse, probably abandoned." Aaron grabbed his coat. "Let's move." The warehouse loomed ahead, a decaying structure on the edge of town. Its windows were dark, and the faint smell of mildew wafted through the air. Aaron and Linda stood with their tactical team outside, reviewing the plan. "Remember," Aaron said, his voice low but firm, "there could be other kids inside. We go in carefully." The team breached the door, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The interior was a maze of rusted equipment and crumbling walls. Aaron's pulse quickened as he moved through the space, his weapon drawn. Clear came the calls from various corners of the warehouse. In a small office, they found a stash of phones, burner numbers scribbled on slips of paper, and a laptop that was still logged in. Aaron scanned the room, his eyes landing on a folder labeled Schedule. Inside were printed spreadsheets, each entry detailing a location, time, and a list of initials. "This is it," Aaron muttered. "This is their drop-off schedule." Linda examined the laptop. "We'll need it to crack this, but if this is what it looks like, we just found their operation hub." Aaron stared at the evidence, knowing it was only the tip of the iceberg. Lila's nightmare wasn't over, not until every child trapped in this network was brought home. The network uncovered. The glow of the police station's dim overhead lights created sharp shadows across the evidence board that now dominated one wall of Aaron's office. String and pushpins connected photographs of Victor Kane, Lila, and a crude map of suspected trafficking routes. Aaron sat at his desk, poring over the spreadsheets they'd recovered from the warehouse. Detective Linda Carson entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, her expression as serious as his. "This is bigger than we thought," Linda said, setting a cup in front of Aaron. We ran the names on the schedule against missing children reports. At least 10 of the initials match cases in neighboring counties. Aaron leaned back, rubbing his temple. That's just the ones we know about. If this is their entire schedule, then there are dozens more. Linda placed a file on the desk. Victor Kane's rap sheet is a mile long, but he's never been caught for trafficking. He's the middleman, a handler. Someone else is running this operation. Aaron nodded, flipping through the file. We need to get him talking. If he's involved at this level, he knows where the kids are being moved. Before they could say more, Aaron's phone buzzed. He answered quickly, his tone sharp. Blake here. Sergeant, Kane's lawyer just showed up. The officer on the other end said. He's refusing to say anything. Aaron swore under his breath. I'll handle it. Victor Kane sat in the stark interrogation room, his face twisted into a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, sat beside him, a thick briefcase on the table. Aaron entered, his gaze fixed on Kane, who leaned back as if the handcuffs binding his wrists were a mere inconvenience. You've been busy, Kane, Aaron said, pulling out the folder of evidence and slapping it on the table. We found your warehouse. And your schedule. Kane's smirk faltered, but his lawyer interjected quickly. Sergeant Blake, my client has nothing to say without an offer on the table. Aaron ignored her, focusing on Kane. You're going to tell me everything. Where the kids are being held, who's running this network, and where the next drop-off is happening. Kane leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And if I don't? Aaron matched his stare, unflinching. Then I'll make sure every piece of evidence we have gets pinned squarely on you. You'll spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison. And trust me, people don't take kindly to men who hurt kids. Kane's smirk returned, but it was weaker this time. You think you're smart, don't you? But you're out of your league, cop. You have no idea who you're messing with. Aaron leaned closer, his voice low and steady. You're right. I don't. But I will. And when I do, I'll tear down every single person in your network, starting with you. The lawyer stood abruptly. This interview is over. My client has nothing more to say. Aaron watched them leave, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. Kane's arrogance told him one thing. Someone higher up was protecting him. Later that evening, Aaron sat with Linda and Maya Hart, the department's cybercrime specialist. Maya was hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked to decrypt the files recovered from Kane's laptop. This guy was good, Maya muttered, her eyes never leaving the screen. Military-grade encryption. Whoever set this up knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Linda crossed her arms, leaning against the desk. Can you crack it? Maya smirked. Please, it's going to take some time, but I'll get in. As they waited, Aaron reviewed the physical evidence again. The burner phones from the warehouse had been taken to forensics, but only a few had usable data. Most had been wiped clean. What about the calls Lila mentioned? Aaron asked. She said Kane was always on the phone. Maya nodded. We found a number in his call log that matches a known burner used by someone named Elliot Graves. He's a ghost. No paper trail, no photos. But he's been linked to trafficking operations in 3 states. Aaron's stomach sank. What do we know about Graves? Not much, Maya admitted. He's meticulous. Every time law enforcement gets close, he disappears. But if Kane's working for him, this is the closest we've ever gotten to his operation. Aaron's phone buzzed again. The message was from an unknown number. You're digging too deep. Back off, or the girl won't be the last. His blood ran cold. He showed the text to Linda and Maya, their expressions mirroring his own alarm. They're watching us, Linda said. This isn't just a network. It's an empire. The following morning, Aaron and his team staged a raid on another location listed in Kane's schedule. The address led them to an abandoned factory on the edge of town. The tactical unit moved in quickly, breaching doors and clearing rooms. The factory was eerily quiet, the stale air filled with the smell of oil and rust. In a back room, they found several cots, each with a child's name scrawled on a piece of tape above it. The room was empty, but the scene painted a grim picture. "They were here," Linda said, examining a half-eaten meal left on one of the cots. "Not long ago." Maya, who had joined them on site, called out from another room. "You need to see this." Erin followed her voice to a makeshift office filled with maps, documents, and photos pinned to the walls. Each photo showed a different child, some identified, others unknown. "They're planning another drop," Maya said, pointing to a map with a red circle around a nearby park. "Tonight." Erin's heart raced. "We're not letting this happen." Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Erin's team set up surveillance around the park. They had plainclothes officers posing as joggers, parents with strollers, and even a street musician. Erin sat in an unmarked van, watching the park through binoculars. His radio crackled as Linda's voice came through. "Black sedan, approaching from the south." Erin tensed. "Stay alert." The sedan parked near the edge of the lot, and two men stepped out, scanning the area. One opened the trunk, pulling out a duffel bag. Erin's gut told him this was it. "Move in," he ordered. The team converged quickly, surrounding the men before they could react. Erin approached as the suspects were cuffed, his focus on the duffel bag. He unzipped it, his breath catching at the sight of ropes, duct tape, and chloroform. "You're done," Erin said, glaring at the men. "Where's Graves?" One of them smirked, blood dripping from a split lip. "You'll never catch him." As the suspects were loaded into patrol cars, Erin stood under the streetlight, the weight of the operation bearing down on him. He knew they were closer than ever to dismantling the network, but until Elliot Graves was behind bars, the fight wasn't over. Closing in on Graves, the precinct was alive with activity. Arrests from the park raid had brought a flurry of new leads, evidence, and a growing sense of urgency. Aaron Blake stood in the center of it all, the weight of the case pressing heavily on his shoulders. The two men arrested at the drop-off site had given little during initial questioning, their smirks and silence indicative of hardened loyalty. But Aaron wasn't deterred. He had other tools at his disposal. In the conference room, the evidence board had expanded. Maps now showed regional trafficking routes, pins connected by red string, marking known drop-off points. Photos of suspects, including Victor Kane and the two new detainees, stared back at Aaron as he studied them. On a separate board, the name Elliot Graves stood alone at the top, circled in bold red. Detective Linda Carson entered the room with Maya Hart trailing behind, her laptop open and glowing. "We've got a breakthrough," Linda announced, her voice laced with excitement. Aaron turned to them, his exhaustion momentarily replaced with curiosity. "What is it?" Maya placed her laptop on the table and tapped the screen. "I decrypted the files from Kane's laptop. They confirm everything we suspected. Graves is running the show. These files detail not just the operations, but also the hierarchy. He's using handlers like Kane to coordinate regional operations, and they report directly to him." Aaron leaned over the laptop, his eyes scanning the text. "Any indication of where he's operating from?" Maya nodded, pulling up a map. "There's a mention of a property in the foothills about 50 miles from here. It's a private estate registered under a shell company linked to Graves. The place is practically a fortress. High walls, surveillance cameras, and a gatehouse." Linda crossed her arms. "If that's his base of operations, it explains why he's been so hard to catch. He's not just hiding, he's entrenched." Aaron straightened, his mind already racing. "We need a warrant and a tactical plan. This could be our best shot at taking him down." The estate. By the time the sun rose the next morning, a multi-agency task force had been assembled. FBI agents, local police, and SWAT teams gathered in a secure staging area, poring over maps and blueprints of the estate. The plan was meticulous. simultaneous breaches from multiple entry points, coordinated drone surveillance, and an overwhelming show of force. Aaron stood before the group, addressing them with the calm authority that had earned him their respect. This man, Elliot Graves, has evaded capture for years. He's responsible for countless abductions and has torn apart countless families. Today that ends. We move fast, we move smart, and we bring every single person on that property into custody. And above all, we protect the children. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd as they geared up. Aaron's mind flickered briefly to Lila's terrified face that first night in the diner. Her bravery had brought them to this moment, and he wasn't about to let her down. The approach to the estate was silent and methodical. Drones hovered high above, feeding live footage to the command center where Maya coordinated the operation. The estate's high walls loomed ahead, their imposing presence a stark reminder of the man they were up against. Team Alpha, move to the north gate. Aaron's voice crackled softly over the radio. Team Bravo, hold position on the south perimeter. Inside the van, Aaron watched the drone feeds on a monitor. Guards patrolled the grounds, their movements precise and rehearsed. Graves had clearly spared no expense in securing his operation. "Wait for my signal," Aaron said, his hand hovering over the radio transmitter. The breach was perfectly executed. Explosions at the gates disoriented the guards, while teams stormed the estate from every direction. Aaron led the charge into the main building, his weapon drawn as he cleared each room with precision. The interior of the estate was as lavish as it was unnerving. Expensive art hung on the walls, juxtaposed with locked rooms containing crude bedding and children's belongings. Aaron's stomach churned as he passed a room filled with surveillance equipment, screens showing live feeds from parks, schools, and playgrounds. Clear came the calls from various teams as they moved through the sprawling mansion. "Blake, we've got something." Linda's voice came over the radio. "Basement, you need to see this." Aaron made his way to the basement, his boots echoing on the polished marble floors. The scene he encountered was chilling. Rows of small, windowless cells lined the walls, each containing minimal bedding and toys that seemed chosen to comfort and control. The air was thick with a metallic tang of fear. "They were holding kids here," Linda said, her face pale. "Recently. The blankets are still warm." Aaron clenched his fists. "Get forensic teams down here. Every detail matters." Graves cornered. While the raid uncovered significant evidence, Elliot Graves himself was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until Maya called from the command center that they got their first real lead. "Aaron, I've intercepted a live feed," Maya said urgently. "Graves is on the move. He's using a hidden tunnel system beneath the estate." "Aaron," Linda shook her head. "They're not budging. Kane's lawyer is stonewalling, and the two guys from the park are career criminals. They know how to keep quiet." Aaron paced the room. "If we can't get them to talk, we'll have to force their hand. What about the financials? Someone this big has to be moving a lot of money." Maya's eyes lit up. "Actually, that's where we might have an edge." Graves was sloppy in one area. He routed money through a series of offshore accounts, but some of the transactions hit local shell companies. I flagged a few businesses that might be fronts. Aaron grabbed his coffee, his mind racing. "Let's bring in the financial crimes unit. If we can freeze their assets, we cut off their operations." A web of corruption. Hours later, Aaron found himself sitting across from an analyst in the financial crimes unit. The room was filled with monitors displaying spreadsheets and transaction histories. The analyst, a meticulous man named Jeremy, adjusted his glasses as he explained what he found. Graves' network runs on a mix of cash and digital transfers. Most of it is funneled through cryptocurrency wallets, but there are physical assets too. Properties, vehicles, even storage units. These shell companies act as intermediaries, making it difficult to trace the money back to him. "Can we shut them down?" Aaron asked. Jeremy nodded. "We've already started the process. Freezing these accounts will disrupt their operations, but it won't stop them completely. They likely have reserves we haven't found yet. Aaron crossed his arms, his frustration mounting. What about the businesses? Can we raid them? We're working on warrants, Jeremy said, but these places are well hidden. Graves didn't pick obvious targets. He used low-profile locations like warehouses and office buildings. Graves speaks. Back at the precinct, Aaron prepared for another round of questioning with Elliot Graves. The man had been stoic during initial interrogations, offering cryptic remarks, but no real information. Aaron knew he had to change tactics. As Aaron entered the room, Graves sat with his hands cuffed to the table, his expression calm but watchful. He looked up as Aaron sat across from him. "You've been busy," Graves said, his voice smooth. "Raiding my estate, freezing my accounts. I have to admit, I'm impressed." Aaron didn't rise to the bait. "You built an empire on the backs of innocent kids. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to dismantle it." Graves smirked. "You think freezing a few accounts will stop this? The network doesn't depend on me. If you take me down, someone else will step in." Aaron leaned forward, his eyes locked on Graves. "Then let's make sure no one can step in. Give me the names of your regional leaders, your transporters, your buyers. Help me burn this to the ground." Graves' smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "You don't get it, do you? This network is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's woven into the system. Judges, politicians, even law enforcement. You can't touch them." Aaron's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that. You're sitting here because we did touch you, Graves, and I'm going to keep going until there's nothing left of your operation." Graves leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You're ambitious, Sergeant. I'll give you that." Aaron stood, his voice firm. "You can either help me or go down as the man who let this network continue to hurt kids. Your choice." Uncovering the rot. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. The Financial Crimes Unit successfully froze millions of dollars tied to Graves' network, crippling their ability to operate. Raids on shell companies uncovered hidden documents, vehicles used for transport, and even storage units filled with fake IDs and forged passports. One of the most damning discoveries came during a raid on a small office building downtown. Hidden in a locked file cabinet was a list of names, politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials who had either turned a blind eye to the operation or actively participated. Aaron stared at the list in disbelief. These are some of the most powerful people in the state. Linda, standing beside him, nodded grimly. "This goes higher than we thought." The implications were staggering. The very system Aaron relied on to seek justice was infected with corruption. But instead of discouraging him, it fueled his determination. "We'd bring them all down," Aaron said, "no matter how high this goes." A glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, efforts to locate the missing children intensified. Lila, still under the care of her foster family, had begun providing more details about the locations where she'd been held. Her descriptions, combined with evidence from the estate, led to a breakthrough. In a remote area outside the city, law enforcement discovered a hidden compound. Inside, they found 8 children, tired, frightened, but alive. The news spread quickly, bringing a rare moment of joy amid the grim work. Aaron visited Lila to tell her the news. She sat in the living room of her foster home, clutching a stuffed animal as she listened. "You helped save them," Aaron said gently. "Because of you, those kids are going home." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear. She smiled, a small but genuine expression of hope. The fight continues. Despite the progress, Aaron knew their work was far from over. Graves' network was vast, and dismantling it piece by piece would take time. But with every raid, every arrest, and every child rescued, they were getting closer. Aaron stood in the precinct's evidence room late one night, staring at the photos and documents covering the walls. The fight wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about giving families a chance to heal and making sure no child would ever endure what Lila had. He took a deep breath, the weight of the case pressing down on him. But he knew he wasn't alone. His team, the rescued children, and even survivors like Lila were part of the fight. And they wouldn't stop until every child was brought home. The corruption exposed. The precinct buzzed with an urgency that hadn't been felt in years. The list of names recovered during the office raid was longer and more damning than anyone had expected. Judges, police officers, corporate executives, and even a sitting senator were implicated in the sprawling network that Elliot Graves had orchestrated. Each name represented a potential roadblock in Aaron Blake's quest for justice. The gravity of the situation was clear. This wasn't just about dismantling a criminal empire. It was about exposing how deeply that empire had infiltrated the very systems meant to protect the innocent. Building a coalition. Aaron stood at the front of a packed conference room. Representatives from the FBI, state police, and even the Department of Justice had gathered to discuss the implications of the recovered evidence. Maya Hart and Detective Linda Carson flanked him, their faces set with the same grim determination he felt. "We have the names," Aaron began, gesturing to a large screen that displayed the list. "These individuals aren't just complicit in Graves' operation. They're integral to it. They've provided cover, funding, and in some cases, direct involvement in trafficking." An FBI agent raised his hand. "How do you propose we handle this? These are powerful people. If we start arresting them, the media will explode, and we risk tipping off the rest of the network." Aaron nodded. "That's exactly why we need to approach this strategically. We'll start with the weakest links, the ones who are likely to cooperate. We apply pressure, build airtight cases, and work our way up the chain." Linda stepped forward, pointing to a section of the list highlighted in red. "These names are low-hanging fruit. Local business owners and minor officials. They're less insulated and easier to flip. If we can get them talking, we'll have the leverage we need for the bigger targets." Maya added, "We've also tracked financial transactions tied to these individuals. Freezing their assets will disrupt their ability to move money or cover their tracks." The room murmured in agreement. The plan was ambitious, but it was the only way to dismantle the operation without leaving anyone untouched. The first arrests. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Warrants were executed across the state, targeting those lower on the list. Aaron and his team personally oversaw the arrests of several key individuals, including a logistics manager who had coordinated transport routes for the network. One of the arrested individuals, a city councilman named Walter Pierce, was brought in for questioning. Pierce was a jittery man in his late 50s, and his trembling hands betrayed his anxiety. "I didn't know it was kids," Pierce insisted, sweat dripping down his temple. "They just told me to look the other way when the trucks came through." Aaron's voice was calm but firm. "But you took their money. You helped them operate. That makes you just as guilty." Pierce shook his head vehemently. "I swear, I didn't know. Please, I have a family. Don't let this ruin me." Aaron leaned forward, his tone cold. "The families of those kids didn't get a choice. Neither do you. The only way you can help yourself now is by telling us everything you know." Pierce broke. Over the next 3 hours, he revealed names, dates, and locations tied to the network's operations. His testimony led to the arrest of a prominent logistics company CEO who had used his fleet to transport children across state lines. A leak in the system. As the arrests mounted, cracks began to form in the tight web of corruption. However, the team's progress was abruptly halted when a critical raid failed. A tip had led them to a suburban mansion believed to house several children and high-ranking members of Graves' network. But when the tactical team arrived, the mansion was empty, its occupants having vanished minutes before. Maya's voice came through Aaron's radio, tense and urgent. "We have a leak." Back at the precinct, Aaron gathered his team. "Someone in our circle is tipping them off," he said, his voice edged with frustration. We need to figure out who before this whole operation unravels. Linda nodded. It has to be someone with access to the case files. That narrows it down. Maya pulled up the precinct's internal access logs on her laptop. Every time we've planned a raid, there's been a spike in access from one specific account. Aaron's brow furrowed. Whose account? Maya hesitated. Captain Thomas Reed. The room fell silent. Captain Reed had been Aaron's superior for years, a man he'd trusted implicitly. The thought of Reed betraying them was almost unthinkable. Confronting the betrayer, Aaron found Reed in his office, reviewing paperwork. The older man looked up as Aaron entered, his expression one of mild curiosity. "Blake, what can I do for you?" Reed asked, setting his pen down. Aaron shut the door behind him, his gaze steely. "We need to talk." Reed's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "About what?" Aaron placed a folder on the desk, opening it to reveal the access logs. "You've been feeding information to Graves' network. Every failed raid, every missed lead. It all points back to you." Reed's face darkened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," Aaron said, his voice sharp. Reed exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. "They have my daughter." Aaron froze. "What?" Reed's voice cracked as he spoke. "She's in college out of state. Graves' people approached me months ago. They showed me pictures of her, where she lived, her daily routine. They said if I didn't cooperate, she'd disappear." "And you believed them?" Aaron said, his voice laced with disbelief. Reed's eyes filled with tears. "What would you have done, Blake?" "Risk your own child. I thought I could protect her by giving them small things. But it spiraled out of control." Aaron stepped back, his anger warring with an understanding he didn't want to admit. "You should have come to me. To anyone." "I couldn't," Reed said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't risk her life." Aaron stared at him, the betrayal cutting deeper than he expected. "You're coming with me," he said finally. "You're going to tell us everything. Unraveling the network." Reed's confession opened the floodgates. He revealed the names of additional collaborators and detailed how the network had manipulated him. Using his testimony, Aaron's team launched a series of coordinated operations, taking down several more high-ranking members. But Reed's involvement came at a cost. The media caught wind of his betrayal, and public trust in law enforcement began to waver. Aaron held a press conference to address the situation. "Yes, there was corruption within our ranks," Aaron said, standing before a sea of reporters. "But we are rooting it out. We will not stop until every individual involved in this network, no matter their position, is brought to justice." A breakthrough. Maya's relentless efforts to decrypt more files finally paid off. She discovered a set of coordinates buried deep in Graves' encrypted messages. The location, an isolated compound in the mountains. "This could be their final stronghold," Maya said. "If Graves' network is still operational, it's here." Aaron nodded. "Then we end this." The final takedown. The air in the staging area crackled with tension as agents and officers prepared for what they hoped would be the final operation against Elliot Graves' sprawling network. The compound identified in the decrypted messages was nestled deep in the mountains, accessible only by a winding, narrow road that cut through dense forest. It was remote, fortified, and teeming with armed guards according to drone surveillance. Aaron Blake stood before his team, the weight of months of relentless work etched into his face. Maps and aerial photographs were spread out on the table behind him, illuminated by the cold light of portable lamps. "This is it," Aaron began, his voice steady but heavy with determination. "Graves built this network on fear, corruption, and the exploitation of the most vulnerable. Tonight, we end it. We rescue the children he's taken, and we dismantle the last stronghold of his empire." Detective Linda Carson, standing beside him, nodded. "We've identified 3 main entry points. The the front gate, the service entrance, and a hidden trail leading to the east wall. Teams will breach simultaneously to neutralize the guards and secure the perimeter. Maya Hart, seated at a portable command station, chimed in. I'll be monitoring from here. The drones will provide live feeds, and I'll guide you through any unexpected obstacles. We're also intercepting their communications to prevent them from calling for reinforcements. Aaron scanned the faces of his team. Remember, there are children inside. Our primary objective is their safety. No unnecessary risks. Move fast, stay sharp, and watch each other's backs. The approach. The convoy of unmarked vehicles wound through the dark forest, their headlights dimmed to avoid detection. Aaron rode in the lead vehicle, his mind racing with scenarios. Despite the meticulous planning, he knew the unpredictability of the operation could throw them into chaos. 2 clicks out, Linda said from the passenger seat, her voice breaking the silence. Aaron gripped the radio. Teams, check in. Alpha, ready. Bravo, ready. Charlie, ready. As they neared the compound, the vehicle stopped, and the teams disembarked, moving silently through the underbrush. The sound of the forest at night, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, contrasted sharply with the tension coursing through the team. Maya's voice crackled softly in Aaron's earpiece. You're approaching the first checkpoint. 2 guards patrolling the west perimeter, armed but distracted. Aaron raised his hand, signaling his team to halt. He motioned to 2 officers, who crept forward and neutralized the guards with swift precision. They dragged the unconscious men into the shadows before regrouping. Checkpoint clear, Aaron whispered into his radio. Breaching the compound. At precisely midnight, the teams moved into position. Aaron stood with Alpha Team at the front gate, watching as Linda and Bravo Team crept toward the service entrance. Charlie Team, led by a seasoned SWAT commander, advanced on the eastern trail. On my mark, Aaron said quietly. He glanced at his watch, the seconds ticking down. 3, 2, 1, breach. The front gate exploded inward as Alpha Team stormed through, their movements swift and coordinated. Gunfire erupted from the guard towers, but Bravo and Charlie teams quickly suppressed the shooters, their precision honed by months of preparation. Aaron advanced through the main courtyard, his weapon drawn. The compound was a sprawling maze of interconnected buildings, its design meant to confuse and delay any intruders. Maya's voice guided them through the chaos. Alpha, take the right corridor. Bravo, secure the dormitory on the 2nd floor. Charlie, move to the basement. Reports suggest that's where the children are being held. Aaron led his team down the right corridor, clearing rooms as they went. Each one told a horrifying story. Chains bolted to walls, makeshift beds, and children's belongings scattered across the floor. His anger burned hotter with every step. Rescuing the children. In the basement, Charlie Team found the children. The room was cold and dimly lit, with rows of small, cramped cells. The kids, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, looked up with wide, fearful eyes as the officers approached. It's okay, one officer said gently, lowering his weapon. We're here to help. The children hesitated, their trust shattered by weeks, months, or even years of captivity. Slowly, one by one, they began to move, their expressions shifting from fear to cautious hope. Aaron arrived just as the last child was being freed. He knelt beside a young boy, no older than 7, who clung to a tattered blanket. What's your name? Aaron asked softly. The boy's voice was barely above a whisper. Jason. You're safe now, Jason, Aaron said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. We're going to get you home. Confronting Graves. As the team secured the compound, Aaron received word that Graves had been located in an underground command center. He made his way there, his steps quick and purposeful. The command center was a stark contrast to the rest of the compound. High-tech equipment filled the room, and monitors displayed live feeds from various locations, parks, schools, and city streets. Graves stood in the center, his hands raised in surrender, his face calm. "You're persistent, Sergeant Blake," Graves said, his tone mocking. "I'll give you that." Aaron stepped closer, his weapon trained on Graves. "It's over." Graves chuckled. "Is it? You've taken down one piece of the network. But the machine keeps running." Aaron's jaw tightened. "We'll dismantle every piece, starting with you." Graves' smirk faded slightly. "Do you really think you've won? There are people out there, powerful people, who won't let this stop. You're fighting a battle you can't win." Aaron lowered his weapon, his eyes blazing. "Maybe not, but I'll die trying." Two officers moved in to cuff Graves. As they led him away, Aaron felt a mixture of triumph and frustration. The man who had orchestrated so much pain was finally in custody, but Aaron knew the fight wasn't over. The aftermath. In the days following the raid, the rescued children were reunited with their families, their tearful embraces captured by media outlets across the country. The public outcry against Graves' network reached a fever pitch, putting pressure on lawmakers to address systemic failures. Aaron sat in his office, reviewing the reports from the operation. The evidence recovered from the compound would implicate dozens more individuals, but the task of bringing them to justice was daunting. Linda entered, a rare smile on her face. "We did it, Aaron. We brought them home." Aaron nodded, though his expression remained somber. "There's still so much to do." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time. We've already made a difference." A moment of reflection. That evening, Aaron visited Lila at her foster home. She greeted him with a shy smile, holding out a drawing she had made. It showed Aaron standing with her and the other rescued children, all of them smiling under a bright sun. "You're a hero," she said softly. Aaron knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "No, Lila, you're the hero. You're the reason we found them." Lila hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. For the first time in months, Aaron felt a glimmer of peace. As he drove home, the weight of the case still lingered, but so did the hope he had seen in Lila's eyes. The battle wasn't over, but it was a fight worth continuing. A legacy of justice. The courtroom was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of a stenographer's keys. Elliot Graves sat at the defense table, his typically calm and collected demeanor slightly cracked. His sharp suit couldn't mask the weight of the evidence piling against him. Aaron Blake watched from the gallery, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. This was the moment they had worked for. Justice was finally within reach. Graves' defense attorney was in full damage control mode, attempting to undermine the prosecution's mountain of evidence. But every counter-argument crumbled under the sheer volume of testimony, forensic proof, and financial records presented by the state. The rescued children, too young to testify in court, had their stories relayed through expert witnesses. Their words painted a grim picture of the horrors they endured under Graves' network. The prosecution's closing statement was unflinching. Elliot Graves built an empire of exploitation and suffering. He preyed on the innocent, shielded by corruption and greed. Today, we dismantle not just his operation, but the rot he represents. We send a message that no one, not even the powerful, can escape justice. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Graves showed no visible reaction as the judge read the verdict, but Aaron noticed the faint tightening of his jaw. For the first time, the man who had eluded law enforcement for years was truly cornered, restoring faith. In the months following the trial, the aftermath of the takedown rippled across the nation. Media outlets chronicled every twist of the case, shining a light on the systemic corruption that had enabled Graves' network to thrive. Public outrage grew into action, sparking reforms in law enforcement, child protection services, and judicial oversight. Aaron found himself at the center of the storm, hailed as a hero by many, but also facing intense scrutiny. The betrayal by Captain Reed had shaken public trust in law enforcement, and Aaron made it his mission to rebuild that trust. "We failed these kids before," Aaron said during a televised press conference. But failure isn't the end. It's the start of a new commitment. We're not just cleaning up the mess Graves left behind. We're creating a system where this can never happen again. One of the first major initiatives was the formation of the Emily Graves Task Force, named after Graves' late daughter. The task force brought together experts in trafficking prevention, victim rehabilitation, and corruption investigation. Its mission was clear: to identify and dismantle trafficking networks before they could grow. Aaron accepted a leadership role in the task force, working tirelessly to ensure it had the resources and reach it needed. He refused promotions that would have taken him away from the ground-level work, knowing that real change came from being in the trenches. Lila's journey. Amid the whirlwind of professional achievements, Aaron stayed connected to Lila, who had become a symbol of hope for the survivors of Graves' network. Her foster family provided a stable and loving home, but her healing process was far from linear. One day, Aaron received a call from Lila's foster mother, Sarah. "She wants to speak at one of your events," Sarah said. I wasn't sure if she was ready, but she's been practicing her speech for weeks. Aaron arranged for Lila to speak at a community outreach event focused on trafficking awareness. When the day came, the room was packed with survivors, advocates, and law enforcement officers. Lila stood on the stage, her small frame dwarfed by the podium, but her voice steady and clear. "I was scared," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I thought no one would come for me, but someone did. Sergeant Blake found me and made me feel safe again. And now, I want to help other kids feel safe too." The room erupted in applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. Lila's bravery inspired countless others to come forward, to share their stories, and to fight for a better future. Breaking the web. Behind the scenes, the task force continued its relentless pursuit of those still tied to Graves' network. Maya Hart's cybercrime expertise uncovered hidden servers and encrypted files that led to arrests in other states and even abroad. The Financial Crimes Unit tracked down offshore accounts, seizing millions of dollars that were funneled into victim support programs. But the biggest breakthrough came when Linda Carson secured testimony from one of Graves' top lieutenants, who struck a deal in exchange for leniency. The lieutenant provided detailed information on the network's global reach, exposing international trafficking routes and high-profile collaborators. One of the names on the list shocked Aaron, a prominent senator who had publicly supported anti-trafficking legislation while secretly profiting from the very crime he denounced. The senator's arrest was a turning point, proving that no one was above the law. A new chapter. Years later, the legacy of the takedown was cemented. Aaron stood on the steps of the Capitol, addressing a crowd at the dedication ceremony for the Lila Initiative, a nationwide program providing education, resources, and support to prevent child trafficking. The fight against trafficking isn't just about arrests or convictions, Aaron said. It's about building a world where children are safe, where families are whole, and where no one has to endure the horrors we've seen. Lila, now a teenager, stood beside him, holding the ribbon that would officially launch the initiative. She smiled at Aaron, her confidence a testament to the resilience he had fought so hard to protect. As the ribbon was cut and the crowd erupted in applause, Aaron felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road had been long and harrowing, but every step had been worth it. Reflection. That evening, Aaron returned to the diner where it had all begun. The corner booth was empty, the memories of that fateful night flooding back. He sipped his coffee, staring out the window as the world outside moved on, unaware of how close it had come to losing its innocence. Linda joined him, sliding into the booth with her own cup of coffee. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" she asked. Aaron nodded. "I'll always think about her. About all of them." Linda smiled. "You gave them a chance, Aaron. That's more than most people get." As the two sat in silence, the bell above the diner door chimed, and a father walked in with his young daughter. Aaron watched as they laughed and took a seat, the simple moment of joy reminding him why he'd never stop fighting. Because for every child he couldn't save, there were countless others who still had a chance. And for Aaron Blake, that was reason enough to keep going.